Yes, good to see you, Stu. Pastor T.
Today is, I think, a special day. Lord willing, hopefully we will finish the workshop meetings today and get started on our work for Module 3 to finish the assignments for the module. And I'll go through and discuss that. But Lord willing, we can finish our study of Psalm 99 and some of the review that we've done so that we can press forward. And hopefully you saw the document I sent that sort of laid out a plan from here, but we'll go over that at the end. And so if you have any questions, I want to make sure to answer those and make some progress together. But for now, let's get back to our discussion. And again, this is as we come toward the end. If I can get myself set up here. All right, good. Okay, good. All right, as you can see, we're right at the end of the exegetical or the exposition process, where we put together our sermon manuscript. And so these are all the steps, men, that we've covered these last 18 sessions together. And I just want to remind you the key points from last week as we get started on the very final step, really, which is preaching the sermon. And the immediate steps before that process, before that event, I mean, that's the key part, right? Actually preaching the message. You know, if we do all that preparation and all that study and all the exegesis, the understanding the timeless truths, putting together a sermon, writing it out, we're not done. In fact, the most important part hasn't yet happened, and that is actually the preaching of that sermon. And so it's important to think about, as you're preparing the manuscript and those pulpit notes, which we'll talk about in a moment, it's important to think about and remind yourself, what is your goal? What is the main objective? And it's, as we discussed last week, it's to be accurate, clear, applicable, and passionate. There's other aspects to the sermon event, to the preaching, but to me, those are the four key pillars, if you will. I think that'd be a good way to put it. The pillars of an expositional sermon. Let's call it that. The pillars of an expositional or expository sermon is that it is accurate. That's number one by far. And that is the most important. Of all of these four steps, you have to be accurate. And then following that is being clear. It's important and critical that you're accurate, but you also need to be able to explain clearly so that you may understand the passage, but the key for the preacher is that those listening to him understand, right? I mean, if they don't know what you're saying, then we haven't done our job. And then applicable, that is, one, I want the sermon to be accurate, right? It needs to reflect the text, as Paul told Timothy, be diligent to show yourself approved so that you will not be ashamed, handling accurately the word of truth. So accuracy is on top, and then clarity, that is that I teach it so that I can be followed, so that people can understand. And then thirdly, I need to help them think about what to do with this passage. It's one thing for them to understand it. It's another thing for them to actually respond to it. We all know what James says, right? James 1:22, prove yourselves to be hearers or doers, not just hearers, right? Did I explain to you last time that word for hearers was it's the word used we use the word auditing a class. You guys have that practice in the Philippines where you audit a class. Someone can sit in on a class, but they don't have to take the test. They don't get credit for it. This is actually the idea behind the word that James used. It's this idea of an auditor. That's somebody that listens to the scripture, listens to the sermon, and it's, oh, what a great sermon preacher, wonderful sermon. But then they don't do anything. It's like the guy sitting in class and he doesn't take the test, he doesn't do the homework, he doesn't do the reading, and he doesn't get a grade. And so James says, don't be that guy when it comes to scripture. Be the guy, one, that does listen, but more importantly, the guy that responds, the doer of the word. And so we as the preachers need to help our people in being doers of the word by giving application, by helping them think about how the passage might apply. And then the last pillar is the passion, that we preach this message as if we believe it. Who was it? You guys know the great preacher George Whitefield. He preached in the Britain, England, and in the United States in the 1700s. And one of the founders of the United States, Benjamin Franklin, used to love to listen to George Whitefield. Now, Benjamin Franklin wasn't a Christian. He was a deist. But he was amazed at the way George Whitefield would preach. Not only his volume, George Whitefield could preach out in the open air to 10,000 people, and they could hear him. No speaker, no microphone, no amplifier. He could just preach open air. And Benjamin Franklin was amazed by that. But what amazed him more was the passion of Whitefield. Benjamin Franklin was quoted as saying, I don't believe what George Whitefield says, but I know that he does. I thought that's an interesting statement, that he could see the passion of Whitefield, and that Whitefield, what he was preaching, he firmly believed, and even a non-believer could see that. And I think that's a testimony to the example of George Whitefield and his passion. And so we need to, as preachers, if we truly are concerned for honoring Christ, and if we truly are concerned for the people who are listening, we're going to have passion, right? If you have a little child that's running out into the street where there's traffic, and you're going to be very passionate as you tell your child to stop, don't go any further. And I imagine you're not going to be saying it like quietly, like, oh, little Pepito, stop. You're not going to say it quietly, are you? You're going to be passionate. Why? Because you care, because he's going into danger. And that's really the mentality of a preacher, is there's a great enemy among us who is trying to deceive, trying to hinder, trying to destroy the hearts and souls of everyone, and even those in your congregation. And so we need to be passionate in our preaching. Okay, so those are the 4 pillars of expository preaching that we talked about in our last session together. So I just wanted to reiterate those. Did anyone have any thoughts or comments about that? Anything else come to your mind? You have any questions before we go to the next step? Just want to give you a chance. Anybody? Okay. So the next step then, how do you decide? Okay, you've written out your full manuscript, and you've spent time on it, you've thought it through, you've put it together. There's a structure, there's an outline, you've got all the illustrations, application, everything's there. And then the question is, how does the preacher, how do you decide what to bring with you into the pulpit? And we talked about the way to make that decision involves really what kind of sermon delivery, or how do you approach preaching that sermon. There's one category or group of preachers that they essentially read a manuscript. And certainly that would be the most accurate and most clear, but as we discussed last week, the least engaging, right? The greatest possibility to be boring, to make it sound like a lecture. So that's one approach to preaching. Another approach is, we call it recitation. That is that you memorize the manuscript and you preach what you've memorized. And that would, again, have the advantages of being the most accurate and the most clear and more engaging, but be very time-consuming. We talked about extemporaneous preaching, and that is where you preach, but you have little or no notes even, but you've prepared, but you just don't bring much with you into the pulpit. That is definitely more engaging, but there's the possibility you may forget certain things that you had wanted to say when you prepared your manuscript. So that there's a risk there. And then finally, there's the category of many preachers around the world, and that's called impromptu, where they essentially just come up with a sermon without really studying, and they don't use many notes. They just talk about what comes off the top of their head. And that's what we all want to avoid. But the question is basically, what is the style in which to preach? What's the most effective style? And while at the same time being accurate, clear, applicable, and passionate. I would say reading a sermon, you're going to be more accurate and clear, but probably less passionate and less engaging. If you're extemporaneous, you're preaching with no notes, you're going to be more passionate and more engaging, but the potential to be less accurate or clear exists. So how do you bring those all together so that you are accurate, clear, applicable, you're engaging, you're passionate? How do we bring all of that together? Well, that's really what you need to think about as you're deciding what kind of pulpit notes you will have, or what kind of teaching notes if you're teaching in a smaller group. What are you going to bring with you to look at, whether it's printed out or on your phone or iPad or whatever you have with you? And so there are some different options, okay? So I just want to talk about each of these briefly. One option is you bring nothing into the pulpit, okay? Except your Bible, okay? Got to bring a Bible. All right, if a guy walks up to a pulpit and he's not holding a Bible, this is a problem, all right? Or at least the electronic device that has the Bible on it. So some people preach like this, where they only bring a Bible, no sermon notes, okay? This would be full extemporaneous preaching, okay? Where they're not using any notes at all. They're completely preaching with full eye contact, engaged with their hearers. All right, so that's one end of this spectrum. Then if we think about the one step up from that, might be to put together a simple outline. That is the notes you bring just have the sermon concept, that is, again, the main point, and the outline. Okay, I know some preachers that do that, where they bring in the sermon concept because they want to make sure that they state and restate that sermon main point so that people remember, and then they bring the outline with them. Maybe they've worded the outline a special way. They want to make sure they don't forget how to do that, but they don't have anything else. All right, so I call that the simple outline. Okay, then there's the basic outline, and this is the simple outline, which also includes a brief explanation or a few notes about each outline point. Okay, so it'd be maybe your sermon concept, and then maybe your 2 or 3 or 4 outline points, and then maybe you add a note or 2 with each point, just something you want to make sure that you remember. All right, that's a basic outline. And then there's the full outline, which is essentially the basic outline with the following included. All right, and that would be, for example, you would have the introduction maybe summarized or partially written out. Okay, because you want to make sure you include what you want to say in the introduction. The body of the sermon has each outline point, and then the proof, picture, plan, and problem summarized in a sentence or two for each. Okay, so it's essentially you have the outline point, and then you have the maybe one or two sentences that have the explanation, just some notes for you to remember some key parts of the explanation, and then maybe a line or a sentence or two for the illustration, a sentence or two for application, and then you just use that as a central thought and then fill it in as you preach. So that's the idea. And then finally, a conclusion, which is summarized or partially written out. Okay, this is what I call the full outline. And I think most preachers who do extemporaneous preaching have this kind of an outline, a full outline, where it's got all of these aspects to it. It's not a full manuscript, but it's got just key points that you want to remember throughout the sermon. All right? And then there's what I call the full outline plus. This is where the intro and conclusion are completely written out. So it's the full outline with full outline. Okay? Now, then there's what we call the partial manuscript, all right? And I'm just going through some of the different options that I know different preachers use for taking notes with them. We'll talk about it together in a minute. I just want to get all of these out to you first. The partial manuscript, that is where the introduction and conclusion are fully written out, as well as each illustration, or I'll just say each picture, plan, problem is summarized in a paragraph. So it's basically not a full manuscript, but it contains many parts of a full manuscript, especially those parts that you want to make sure you say in a certain way. So sometimes maybe you have a quote, or maybe you want to describe a particular illustration. You want to make sure you get it correct and accurate, so you write that out. Or maybe particular application points, you write those out because you want to make sure you don't forget any. The introduction you write out in full so that as you begin the message, you have all the information in front of you. But it's not word for word everything in the sermon. That would be what we call the full manuscript, all right? Which is the whole sermon written out. Basically what you prepared or what you wrote for the sermon preparation. Okay, so here, let me do this. I think hopefully you can see all of that. All right, these are the different options that guys use. Everything from bringing nothing into the pulpit to bringing everything into the pulpit. All right, I've even seen guys not only bring a sermon manuscript, sometimes I'll see them bring a few commentaries with them. Have you ever seen that? They bring commentary with them into the pulpit. And I've seen sometimes guys actually, they go, oh, I want to read you how this guy said this. So they'll actually read from a commentary. It's usually not very interesting, but some guys have done that. But essentially, I've seen guys go from nothing to the pulpit to full manuscript. And then guys argue about this. If you sit in different preaching classes, depending on your preaching professor, one guy will argue for no notes. You should know your passage, man. And when you get in that pulpit, you should know what you're going to say. You shouldn't need any notes to help you. Notes are a crutch. Notes are for people who don't know how to preach. You know, some guys, they almost say there's a verse in the Bible that says, "Thou shalt preach without notes, or you are in sin," right? Some guys are kind of like that. Or, you know, my seminary professor was very much of the side of, you know, preach with no notes. He wasn't as crazy about how he said it, but he was, you know, said that we need to be engaging. That's important in communication, and so he favored no notes. But I have for my doctor of ministry program, the Steve Lawson and many of the other professors or pastors that taught that course, a lot of them use notes. Many of them use partial manuscript. Steve Lawson uses almost a full manuscript. About 75% of what he says is on a manuscript. Pastor John MacArthur, about the same thing. He brings a manuscript with him into the pulpit. And those guys are great preachers. But they advocate, you know, bringing more of a manuscript in the pulpit. Don't read it, they say, but they definitely bring a lot of notes with them. And so you've got guys on both sides really that argue for one position or another. And I've heard guys use George Whitefield as an example to preach without notes, right? He was known for, as I mentioned earlier, he was an incredibly gifted speaker, incredibly gifted communicator, and he would preach without notes. He would get up in towns, in cities, in villages, out in the fields. He would go out into the cornfields and just start preaching, and people would gather around, and he didn't have any notes. And so that's what some of these guys who encourage that, they would say, so see, follow George Whitefield's example. He never used notes, and look how powerful he was in his preaching. He affected thousands of people. So if you want to be a godly preacher, if you want to be a holy preacher, then you preach with no notes, just your Bible in your hand, right? And they use George Whitefield as an example. And I think we have to remember a couple of things. For one, that's George Whitefield, and we're not him. You know, he was incredibly gifted. Charles Spurgeon is another. He only brought in an outline with him into the pulpit. That's what he would come up with on Saturday night. He would study during the week. Saturday night, he would go into his study, into his office, and he would write out the outline. And that's what he would take with him in the pulpit Sunday morning. So I hear guys saying, why don't we just do that? Let's just study during the week, and all we'll write is an outline. I say, well, you're not Charles Spurgeon. So he was uniquely gifted. So I think we have to be careful when we hold up one preacher as the ideal, or this is the guy we all should copy. There's only one person, by the way, that we should think that way about. That's Jesus Christ. You know, we should study carefully how he preached. He's the model, by the way. And I guess he didn't have notes, so maybe that says something. No, I don't think he would be against notes per se, but you know, some people who believe that, I'm sorry, is there a question? Brother
We
Jess?
are not Jesus Christ also.
Yeah, exactly. We aren't him either, but we are called to follow his example, and that would also include preaching for sure. But still, even the style and the method, the approach. I mean, in Jesus's day, he did speak to large crowds. You know, he preached to large crowds without notes at all. At the same time, we don't have any prescription in the Bible about how we should preach. Like what do we bring with us? Or all Paul said is preach the word in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience. For the time will come when, wanting their ears tickled, they will turn away and turn aside to false teaching. So we need to keep that in our minds, that our primary responsibility is preach the word. Now, the issue is, how can we be most effective, or more importantly, how can you be most effective in communicating God's word accurately, clearly, passionately, and applicably? That's really, to me, the answer at what you should bring in the pulpit. All right? That's to me the bottom line. Okay? Let me write it this way. What will make you the most effective in communicating God's word accurately, clearly, applicably, and with passion? All right? That's what you need to use as your guide for what kind of notes you bring in the pulpit with you. All right? If you bring a full manuscript with you in the pulpit, but you're still able to be accurate and clear, applicable, with passion, and I think we should also add perhaps be engaging. If you're able to do that with a full manuscript, that's great. Okay, again, I know several preachers that use a full manuscript or a majority, 80% of a manuscript when they preach. And like I said, Steve Lawson and John MacArthur are among those. And I would say they're pretty good preachers. All right. So there are those who preach with full manuscript that are extremely effective. Okay. And then I've seen other guys that when they have notes, they're not effective because they're reading them, they're lecturing, they're stuttering, or sometimes, I've seen guys that, they have their notes and they miss something in their notes. And so they, oh, sorry. And then they'll go back and, let's see, where did I say that? And they're so tied to their notes, it's a distraction. But then I've seen other guys who have no notes and they're extremely effective, powerful preachers. But I've also seen guys with no notes who are not as effective. They are often forgetting things. They're pausing. They're doing rabbit trails. They don't remember their outline well. They start telling lots of stories because they have nothing to guide them. All right. And then I've seen other preachers with no notes that are very effective. He's escaped my mind. He just preached at the Shepherd's Conference. I've got his face in my mind, but his name I went blank. It'll come to me. But he is very effective preacher. I forgot. But he doesn't use any notes at all. His mind is able to work in such a way. So I think we want to be careful that we don't make using notes or the kind of notes or full manuscript or no manuscript. We need to be careful not to make that the focus or the priority in preaching, but make this, what I just wrote here, that's the most important. What's going to help you be the most effective in communicating God's word accurately, clearly, passionately, engaging, applicably? All right? That's your guide. And for some of you, you might be bringing notes in the pulpit and you shouldn't because they're hindering you. Others of you may not be bringing notes in the pulpit, but that's hindering as well, potentially. All right? So I don't want you to think that if you bring notes in the pulpit, you're somehow less godly. Oh, I should be able to preach with no notes. That's what a godly preacher would do, but don't think that way. All right? You need to be thinking, what is it that will help me to teach or to preach most effectively? Meaning accurately, clearly, passionately, be engaging, be applicable. What's going to help me to do that? All right? Well, let me get your thoughts. I want to interact with you a little bit on this. What do you guys think about this? What are your experiences? Maybe I'll just ask a few of you. First of all, anyone want to offer their thoughts, and then I'll maybe call on a few of you to see what you think.
As for me, Pastor Tim, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I could not preach without a full manuscript in front. I mean, English is not my first language. Maybe I can do that with English Bisaya preaching, but since we are in a English speaking congregation, I could not not allow myself to bring the full manuscript in front. I may be able to do an outline manuscript, something like that, if I will not be too conscious about how to say it in English. But yeah, that's my problem or challenge this time.
No, that's a good point though too, is if you're preaching in a second language, that's another factor to consider, is you could be hindered in your accuracy or clarity if you don't have some notes there to help guide you at times. So
yeah, and
that's a good.
So what I'm doing right now is I would give some ad libs just to not be too technical about it and somehow sound like robot if
Yeah.
if you're just following the full manuscript itself, or write it in a way as if you are speaking to an audience. I mean, project an audience in mind and then tell it to them. Write it in a manner that you're imagining yourself as speaking to them rather than just writing an article. I mean, there's a difference in the tone of the two.
Yes. Yeah, that's
how I would do it.
That's a good point. That's how I write my manuscripts. I write my manuscripts as if I'm saying them. So I'll put things in there that normally you wouldn't do for a written document, but
yeah,
but they're cues for me as I'm speaking that help me. So that's a good point. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? What do you do and how does that help you?
Pastor Tim,
yeah.
This is my observation. Those preachers without notes, they are particularly gifted maybe in evangelism.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I attended church years ago. The preacher always without notes. They always teach about salvation, and then the church will not grow because he emphasizes many times about salvation, and so there's no need for him to prepare a notes because the mastery of his preaching is salvation.
So he's not so much teaching the passage in front of him, but doing taking a passage and then just going to a gospel presentation. Yeah. And sometimes that can happen if you don't prepare, but also two, if you don't have any notes, oftentimes you will just go to what you're comfortable and what you normally say. So that's one danger of doing no notes, but it's not the case for everybody that does that, but that's one thing to keep in mind. What do you do, Pastor German? Do you use notes or
full outline?
What's that? What, an outline?
Full outline. I use full outline. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you
the way we do in the TIA.
Okay.
The process, yeah. I have poem, I have problem, I have illustrations. Yeah.
So you put those in. So you don't write it out. You don't use full notes, but you have those.
Yeah, manuscript type. Yeah.
Okay, good. How about you, Jason? What do you do?
think Pastor Tim, I consider that full manuscript. Uh, Although I don't go with it verbatim, but that's usually my guide on the flow of my thought. Um, my dilemma is that I cannot really preach in pure Tagalog, and I cannot preach on. I'm having hard time preaching in pure English. So because in our place, we got used to hear Taglish preaching. So the importance of having a full manuscript, I can shift immediately once in a while to those, as you've said, important things that I could read. Yeah. That's why I think I could call that full manuscript.
Okay.
It's usually 20 pages.
Have you tried to preach without notes or with just an outline?
Yes, Pastor Tim, and I found it more engaging.
Yeah. So why didn't you stay with that?
Probably it takes a lot of preparation. I think so. When you use the outline notes on the pulpit, and a lot of uh, yeah, preparation, I think. So, but I really found it more engaging. So, but as we are doing in Teya, I just really want it just for now to follow all the steps and be able to be familiarized, so that that's why I want to do this step by steps and until the end. But later on, probably I could try.
Yeah, I'm gonna give some suggestions at the end to consider for you guys. But that's good. So you've at least tried to do that.
Pastor
How about
Tim,
yes?
uh, I forgot the third option from the nothing. Was it the simple outline?
Yeah,
Basic.
basic
Ah,
outline.
basic. Okay. From the full manuscript, I would make that basic outline. So, having background in productions, so this is somewhat of my own personal uh, uh, script, or just cue board or some a cue card, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And I'll just put it in front of me. However, I will really make sure that I not only know, head knowledge of the full manuscript, but really have gone through the steps, so that when I create that, it's as if I will be saying it. It's just like there's a basic outline, so I know
yeah.
I won't, use up more time than what is necessary, and then I don't go off tangent. Because I think that would be more. I think that's more engaging, especially when you like deliver it or communicate it with um, eye contact to
Yeah.
your hearers.
Yeah, that's definitely the danger with having too many notes is you can depend on them or rely on them, and so you're more engaged with with your notes than you are with the people that that you're teaching or preaching to. And so we want to be careful of that for sure. All right, good. Anyone else? How about Pastor Ramel? What do you normally do as far as what you bring to the pulpit with you?
Yeah, actually, I tried all of those things. I tried bringing nothing, simple outline, basic outline,
Grabe.
outline,
Kompleto man.
but I feel comfortable having full outline or basic outline. For nothing, especially in times like this, I easily forget. And sometimes the sermon that I'm using, especially I'm preaching twice on Sunday.
Mm.
So I need a full outline because sometimes if only simple outline, maybe in the other sermon, so it could be another way. So I'm
Yeah,
at this time I'm comfortable for my full outline.
yeah.
But
Okay,
for my
so you,
for my Bible study, I could use simple outline and basic outline. But now
yeah,
I don't want nothing because I really don't remember sometimes.
that's a good point too, is the type of teaching format can also affect what you use for notes. If you're preaching from a pulpit, it's one-way communication to a congregation. There's maybe a certain style type of notes you bring, as opposed to if you're teaching a Bible study or a small group, or perhaps a in a more informal setting, where sometimes in an informal setting notes are not a problem. You can pause, look, kind of like what we're doing, where times I'll pause, I'll look at some notes, and I think that's okay. It's a little different than in a preaching situation where you're the only voice, and when you stop or do something else, all attention's directed towards you. Then that might be more of a distraction if you're not careful. So also too, yeah, keep in mind that the type of teaching that it's going to be, that can affect what you want to bring with you as far as your notes. Thank you, Pastor Ramel. Pastor Kent, how about you? What are you most
Actually, Pastor
comfortable with?
Tim, full manuscript as of now because I, I write in English, but I preach in Cebuano. The same with Pastor Jason.
Oh,
Struggle that kind of mix. So right now is I write in Cebuano, practice directly, because when I write it in English and I directly translate in Cebuano, that my wife said the thought it's not more, it's different than the English.
yeah.
so now so now I write in Cebuano actually.
Because
So that more clear.
you preach in fully in Cebuano.
Yes,
Okay.
fully Cebuano, but mix also. But my outline is in English and can.
Because you've studied in English, right? Is that why you have an outline in English?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Oops. I think it looks like
That
it's.
I cannot understand also.
I'm
That
sorry.
is easy to understand in English. That I can illustrate more. More than the Cebuano. So that is why when I translate Cebuano, some words is English in the form. I cannot
Yeah.
translate in Cebuano
Yeah.
because it will change the content or the meaning. I do not know how to use that word in Cebuano.
Yeah.
Actually,
That's the
that's what
challenge.
in my can preaching.
Thank you. How about you, Brother Manuel, Pastor Manuel? What do you use for your notes?
I use full outline.
Full outline?
Uh,
So not a full manuscript, but a full outline. Is that
some also full manuscript,
okay?
just like Pastor Jason and Pastor Ken, English and Cebuano.
Oh, okay. So do you write it out in English and preach in Cebuano?
Yes.
Okay. Have you tried no notes or just simple
No,
outline? No?
I easily forgot because of my age.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's another factor, actually. As we get older, sometimes our memory is like, I still can't. Oh, H.B. Charles. Ah, I remember the preacher. All right. The guy I was trying to remember that.
H.B. Charles Jr.
Yeah, Junior. No notes. The guy's amazing. But anyway, sorry, Pastor Manuel. That sees my old age too. I forget. That can happen when we preach. So it's helpful to have some of the notes in front of you to remind you. How about you, Jed? What do you do? What do you use as far as when you're preaching?
I use both partial manuscript and full manuscript as our team. And so yeah, I usually rely on notes. It's because I'm not Bisaya. I'm not used also to speak in English. So that's why sometimes when I speak in English, they would say, "Are you Ilonggo?" So there's in a way the way we speak is really we're like singing. So it's really a struggle for me to speak in any language. Even if you are going to Manila, kahit magsalita pa ng Tagalog. So there's a tone of voice in the way we speak. So it's really different. So it's really first when we speak, it's really a struggle, because we use it like we are singing in our own hometown in Negros Occidental.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's the first thing. But I remember one time, because I rely on full manuscript, and so I usually use my cell phone. And then during the sermon with in the one of the worship service inside the camp in Camp Lapu-Lapu here in Cebu.
Yeah.
So during the time, it's my time to preach. So I open my cell phone and check my notes. It's in PDF form. So when I open it, it cannot be opened. It's because it needs to be updated. So what should I do? So I think that's why it's really important to have this, throughout the week to study well. So that's a good thing. That time I really study well. If not,
Yeah.
but still, there's a lot of things I miss a lot of points at time, and so I learned the lesson. So the next Sunday, what I did was I print in paper.
Yeah.
And then there's a problem. The strong wind blows my paper. And then when I gather all together, and then it took time for me. Where's the page one, page two? So it's mixing all together. So yeah, and that's why I learned the lesson. Yeah, sometimes I fully admit, Pastor Tin, I use full manuscript and partial manuscript because it's because of language barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to kind of share what your approach is? Pastor Eric, what do you do?
Uh, I tried all the options, Pastor Tim, but usually full outline
Full outline?
and full outline plus usually.
Okay. So
Yes.
not a full manuscript, but some
there are
sentence.
times.
What do you preach in Cebuano, or what do you?
Mix Cebuano, English, because our problem here in the Philippines, in Cebu, our textbooks or our all of our materials is in English.
Yeah.
So we don't have Cebuano materials, only Bible. So that's the reason why sometimes it's hard for us to prepare the outline or the manuscript to translate it into Cebuano. It's really hard. So usually our outline or our manuscript is in English, but we preach in Cebuano.
Okay. Yeah, that makes it a more of a challenge. So is your full outline, what you take with you in the pulpit, is that in English or in Cebuano?
In English.
Ah, okay.
But there are lines I translate so that I can engage and emphasize.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Yeah.
How about Joshua? What do you like to do? What do you use when you teach?
Usually a full outline plus I tend to stick. I tried the full manuscript before, but I tend to stick to the manuscript rather than looking to the people. And there was even one time they commented, "I like your voice, but I'd rather close my eyes because I feel like I'm listening to a radio." So that's why I started to do a full outline plus so that I can be more engaging.
I see. Yeah. Okay, good. That's helpful for me to know kind of how you guys are approaching it. Anybody else that I haven't called on that want to sort of tell us, what do you use?
Mr. Tim,
Yes, Jess.
uh, I am on full manuscript preacher. Um, During my Sundays, I will always bring my full manuscript.
Is it in English, the manuscript?
Yeah, full English, Pastor Tim.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have two services. I have bilingual English and Cebuano, and I also have straight Cebuano in the afternoon.
Oh, okay. Oh, so then you
And
have, oh, okay. So two different Cebuano services then also.
morning, because there are listeners in our morning service that cannot understand straight Cebuano. So I
Oh,
have self. That's not my. That's very uncomfortable language for me. But I have to stretch myself to minister to them. But in our evening service, I preach straight Cebuano because the crowd there are the elderly and those who
okay.
are not English speaking.
Okay.
And that's it. In my Sunday, I always use my full manuscript. And for the past 20 years, I also find it being blessed by the Lord. Uh, but during our prayer meeting, I only bring with me the basic outline. And also, if there are some like Bible studies, I bring the basic outline.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those are usually more interactive, right? So,
And also, Pastor Tim, I find it that there is really a way to bring the full manuscript, but still engaging.
yeah.
I used to, even in there are times that I read my manuscript, I read it in a conversational voice, but actually I'm not sticking my eyes on the manuscript, and that's why I am convinced that bringing the full manuscript can also be very engaging.
Yeah, again, it's the issue is this. What is it that will make, each of us, the way that we are built and our skills, our abilities, our age even, what language we're preaching in, those are all factors, and we need to consider all of those things and then say, what will make me the most effective? Okay, this is the key. What will make me
Also, Pastor Tim,
yeah, go ahead.
Helpful full manuscript, very helpful, especially if I preach what I call is unfamiliar topic.
Mm-hmm.
Say for example that there's a topic that I rarely preach, or the topic that I did not preach in the past yet. And I really need that full manuscript before me for me to be able to share what needs to be shared to the congregation.
Yeah.
Like what Pastor Herman mentioned, um, if it's evangelism, we can do it without notes. But if it's unfamiliar topic, uh, I find it very difficult for me to preach without my full manuscript before me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Again, it's what, you know, our objective, going back to that, accurate, clear, applicable, passionate. We could add to that engaging. What's going to help you do that most effectively? And it could be different. What I bring in the pulpit, you know, the more extemporaneous you can be, right, the better. The more engaged you are with your hearers, the better. I bring in, I just have one example. It'd be hard to see it, but I'll attach. You'll see my Psalm 99 sermon, but basically, you know, I just bring something like this with me. It's a full manuscript, but notice I highlight different parts of the manuscript so that I'm not reading it, but I'll glance down and I'll grab those highlighted words, and that will trigger in my mind, you know, what I want to say. All right. And so it's a full manuscript, but I try to work hard at not looking at it too much. And so, you know, I think ultimately it's going to be how you come across to your hearers, right? And I think we talked about in a previous session, you know, some ways to evaluate how we're doing. And, you know, one of the suggestion was to record yourself and then watch yourself. See if you're a distraction. Another is to ask people in your congregation, you know, are you effective in how you communicate? You know, and if they say, well, Pastor, you don't look at us very much, or, you know, Pastor, you're kind of hard to follow sometimes. I don't know the structure of your message real well, or you know, whatever feedback they give you, that'll help you to know if you're being effective or not. So I would suggest, some of you've said you've tried different. Also, here's my I love this quote. I don't know who said it, but he said, a short pencil is better than a sharp memory. And the idea there being is, you know, I write out my manuscripts because I can't remember everything, like Brother Ramel said, right? Emmanuel said that, you know, sometimes our memory is having a harder time as we get older. And so the notes are a helpful thing for me to consider. But I'd like to make a suggestion, and this is just something that you can consider, is if you preach normally with a full manuscript, try to use little or no notes for, say, 3 to 4 weeks. Just commit to a block of time, maybe a series or something, and just try it and see how it goes. Don't just do one sermon, say, oh, well, I tried no notes, and that didn't help. But actually do, you know, and I've tried this where I do 3 or 4 weeks without notes just to see how it goes. You know, I've seen guys do this and they actually realize that they're better preachers without notes. Or I've seen it the other way around. I've seen guys who don't use notes and I say, hey, you know what? Why don't you use a manuscript for 3 or 4 weeks? Just take one with you and kind of follow it as you preach. And they're actually better. I've seen that in preaching lab. I've told a couple of guys in another preaching lab, you know, who don't use notes. I said, why don't you try notes? And they actually were much, much better. And then a couple of guys I've said, why don't the next sermon you do, don't use notes and let's see how it goes. So I don't tell everybody to do that, but sometimes I notice if a guy is, you know, not clear or hard to follow, I'll suggest that he use more notes to help him be more clear. And if a guy is is too attached to his notes and reading all the time, I'll suggest to try without notes. All right, so this is just something, if you preach every week, why don't you try this? And then record yourself. Record yourself a couple of weeks with preaching with notes or what you normally do, and then record yourself for a few weeks doing something different. Just so again, I would just suggest trying that. Even if you've preached for a long time a certain way, don't just assume that's the only way you can do it. Perhaps there's another approach that you might be more effective in. So just want to have you consider that, okay? There's one other aspect, and it really has to do with how we are to be engaging with the congregation, and that's in our sermon delivery, like the style, the manner in which we actually preach. I'm not talking about now whether you have a manuscript or not. I'm talking about all those other parts of preaching. This is known as sermon delivery, is also known as homiletics. Or the art of preaching. All right, the homiletics. When you're actually in the midst of preaching, how do you communicate? How effective are you in engaging the congregation? And so I wanted to just talk about a few. While we're preaching, it's not just what we say, but also how we say it, right? That is also a form of communication. Your body language, your voice, your facial expressions, the other parts of your body. Do you walk around? Do you use your hands? These kinds of things. So I just wanted to spend a moment and talk about some of these elements and throw the question to you is basically what makes, or let's see, how can I word this? What is an effective use of your voice? What is ineffective or a hindrance? All right, let me just ask it in those ways. So what do you guys think? What's an effective use of your voice? What should we consider when we're thinking about our voice in regards to preaching? How can we be a more effective preacher with our voice? What do you guys think?
And also the variation.
I'm sorry, what did you say at the beginning?
It must be clear and appropriate for the size of the congregation, and also the variation of our voice.
Okay.
It must not be monotone.
Yeah.
Dynamics, Pastor Tim.
Dynamic, yeah. But that's a good point too, Pastor Jess, that volume, you have to consider the size of the group, the room that you're in. I think I told you guys about that preacher in Africa who we were in a small room and he was just yelling and, gave us a headache. So, but he said, if you ain't yelling, you're not preaching. That was his belief, but said he wasn't considering the size. But dynamic, what do you mean by that, John?
Just like what Pastor Jesse said, Pastor Tim, there's a variation in your voice. You know when to speak softly, you know when to...
These kinds of things, your pace, your volume, right? So variation, yeah, like Jesse said, if you just speak in one tone and one speed for the entire time, it can sound like a robot and people start falling asleep.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And again, that's the danger with looking at your manuscript too much. You can, a preacher can sound like that. Okay, anything else? Effective use of voice.
Also reflect the tone of the passage. It should also reflect.
Okay, good. Yeah, if it's a joyful passage focused on rejoicing or a happy event or occasion, then, you know, using your voice in an excited way is good. But if it's somber, if it's serious, then matching that with your voice as well. Pastor German? Yeah.
How about the proper the way we breathe, the proper use of breathing?
Breathing?
Yeah,
yeah.
Because,
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, because most preachers preach here in the tongue, the throat,
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. So it is bad for us because the throat will damage, for in a long time. So it is good that our voice come out from our abdomen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The diaphragm.
Diaphragm.
Yeah, down here.
Diaphragm,
Yeah.
Voice lesson.
Yeah, that's like
voice lessons, yeah.
for singing. Singers have, you know, learn to force from the diaphragm, not the throat. Good. Now, what can be a hindrance with our voice? What do we have to be careful of?
Being monotone.
Yeah, definitely monotone, or preaching at one volume.
Yeah.
Right? Like the guy in Africa I told you about. He was at one volume. He was, you know, high volume the whole time. And that's just as hindering as if you were speaking, you know, quietly for the whole time and you don't change your voice level. And right, people have a hard time hearing. You know, it's the same thing. We need to vary our volume. All right. What else? What can be a hindrance in regards to our voice?
Angry voice.
Angry? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, if we careful with this when you raise your volume. Sometimes to get that higher volume, it's more, we might sound more angry. That was a problem I had. When I was trying to reach the higher volumes, people told me later, they say, you sound mad, but I know you're not angry, but it sounds that way. And that was because I wasn't using the higher volume properly. And really for me, higher volume is not a way for me to be more effective. And this brings me to an important point. Use your voice in the way that makes you most effective. Okay? So, some of you are not, you shouldn't preach loud. All right? Some of you should not preach slowly. You know, some of you, it's figuring out what makes you more hindering to listen to. Okay? And that's the thing. This is where feedback is important. Okay? Some of you are more effective by speaking more slowly and more quietly. Others of you will be more effective if you can learn to you know, raise your voice or speak with more authority at times. But it's different for all of us. Again, it's better not to point to one preacher and say we all should preach like that guy as far as his volume or these homiletics, because you know, God may have made you a little different. Anything else that comes to mind that could be a hindrance in regards to voice? Okay, so find out for you what communicates emphasis. As preachers, we need to be able to communicate emphasis in our sermon. For some of that, and that can be different. For some of you, it's volume, right? When you raise or lower your voice. If you speak at a higher level and then you get quiet and you pause.
Also, Pastor Tim, is the audio system of the church.
Yeah.
The amplifier.
Yeah. We had a real good friend of mine. We were just joking about this last week. He visited our church, and he preaches with volume. He's passionate. He's a black preacher. He's very passionate preacher. So he was preaching at our men's conference, and he got so excited he blew out one of our speakers. He yelled so loud, one of our speakers just went pop, and so we still laugh about that. But yeah, if the speaker's loud, you don't need to be as loud, right? So that's a good thing to consider. But find out for you what communicates emphasis. It could be volume, it could be pace. So maybe you preach at a faster pace and you need to slow down sometimes. Okay, or maybe you preach slowly and you need to speed up. Could be volume, could be pace, could be intensity. Again, what is it that for you can communicate emphasis effectively? By emphasis, I mean those parts in the sermon where you really want people to see the conviction and the urgency and the importance, right? You know, there's different times in sermons at different places where you want to really make sure that they grab this point. This point's so important. They can't miss this. How do you communicate emphasis there? All right, and that's something you need to figure out. Get feedback from others. You may think that you are good, you know, preaching it loud, but maybe some people say that's not the case. All right, so that's something to consider. What communicates emphasis? Find that. But most importantly, use your voice in the way that makes you most effective and not a hindrance. You don't want to be speaking in such a way that when many people listen to you, it's a hindrance to them. Oh, that guy, he speaks so loud. It's hard for me to concentrate, or this preacher, he speaks so softly, I can't really hear him, or this preacher has a weird way that he talks that just, it's hard to listen to. Or this preacher keeps saying all the time. Or he keeps repeating this word over and over and over, and it's becoming a hindrance. So make sure that you're not a hindrance in how you use your voice. Okay? All right, let's cover briefly. How about your hands? Again, let me ask those same two questions. What's an effective use of your hands?
Emphasize.
Yeah. And how can
Pound
they
the pulpit?
Yeah, how can they be? I stopped doing that when we take communion. We put the communion cups on our pulpit, and one time I hit it so hard the cup bounced up all over my notes. Everyone in the congregation went, you know, so I don't do that as much anymore. But yeah, an effective use of our hands. Any ideas? Any thoughts? How can we use our hands to be, how can we use our hands to enhance the message?
To
Put it
draw
that
an
way.
illustration.
I'm sorry?
To draw an illustration, yeah.
Okay, how can I use my hands to do that?
Yeah, to picture out using the hands.
Oh, I see. So if I'm
Just
talking
yes,
about clouds or sun, right? Brightness, that kind of thing. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
this, more
you
than enough.
Yeah.
Sign language.
More than enough.
More than enough.
Yeah, more than enough. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. You know Pastor Mel's third book, right?
yeah, parenting.
Yeah,
I have
remember? I told you parenting. I've had enough.
Family planning.
Family planning.
Pastor.
But okay, so how can we use our hands to enhance the message? Any other ideas or thoughts?
Like what Pastor Stephen Lawson is doing.
Yeah, he uses lots of emphasis, right? He's pretty broad with his hands, and we get that as emphasis at times, right? Or he'll use his finger, right, and kind of as he's doing certain parts of his sermon, and it can be very effective. He uses his hands really to communicate emphasis a lot. All right, how can our hands be, or arms, hands and arms, how can they be a hindrance?
Too
Mannerism.
much gesture.
Unnecessary use, like picking your nose.
Yeah, I knew a guy that he'd put his hand in his pocket and he had keys in his pocket. And so sometimes in the sermon, he'd, kind of when he stopped and he'd get conversational, and then he'd put his hands in his pocket and start jingling his keys. That was a hindrance. Or yeah, if you're, one thing I used to do a lot is I would clear my mustache or adjust my glasses, or do this. And then my wife told me one time, she says, "Honey, why do you scratch your mustache all the time?" And I didn't know I was doing it until the next sermon. I was doing this. Right. So, but she said that's distracting.
In sign language, it translates into like a curse word or something.
So definitely have to be careful, right? So watch the repeated gestures. Don't make unnecessary noise with your hands, right? Some guys like to tap the pulpit, right? Or they have these nervous habits they use with their hands, or they do the same motion over and over, right? So they just, even no matter what they're saying, they keep kind of doing the same motion. And after a while, it's kind of a hindrance, right? It's distracting when somebody's, whether they're speaking with emphasis and passion, or whether they're speaking quietly, or whether they pause, right? It's pay attention to what you're doing with your hands. Any other thoughts about the use of hands? Good or bad? Anybody?
The effective way, one of the effective way is actually to gain and maintain attention. And of course, the opposite would be ineffective. It would be a distraction.
So how do we gain and maintain attention with our hands?
Well, in the same way that you gain attention is to perhaps clap it because you'd see the audience, or you'd see the people if they're engaged or somewhat sleepy or somewhat
Okay.
lax.
I got you.
So you can either clap, make an emphatic noise to draw their attention, and at the same time, waving, make waving gestures so that you direct their attention toward you, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, and doing it at appropriate moments in the sermon. So yeah, again, this is something that you'll have to watch yourself, watch yourself preaching to know if you're using your hands or not, or if they're a distraction or not. And we could say the same thing with, I'll skip to body for a minute. The use of our body, right? How much do you walk? Yeah, go ahead.
Going back to the use of hands, I think we should also culturally conscious, because in some cultures there are what I call that, using of hands or like a finger that are offensive to them. I cannot think of any. I heard a story, but I forget the detail of the story. But I think it's in African, if I'm right. There's certain, I think, I don't know if it was left or right hand, that it was not appropriate for the preachers to raise or something like that. So my point is, we should also be culturally conscious.
Yeah, that is a good point, because I did watch a preacher, a foreign preacher, a non-American, preaching one time, and we use the number, like you're talking about, point number 1. The first thing to consider when it comes to prayer, and he didn't use this finger, he used his middle finger, and he turned it around. And in America, that's a really vulgar. And he kept doing it in his sermon. I'll just use this finger, but he had his middle finger up, and he kept saying, so we knew he wasn't saying that, but it was really a distraction, because some people, it's very offensive. And so we told him at the end of the sermon, brother, don't use that gesture. And but it was too late, right? He already did it the whole sermon. So, but yeah, so help out foreigners. Help me out when I'm there. If I use a certain gesture that's inappropriate, just let the guy know, so that he knows not to do it next time. Yeah, there was one culture, I don't know if it was Western or not, European or not, but if you hold your fingers up this way versus this way, one way it's offensive, the other way it's not. I don't remember where that was, so it's good to keep in mind. Let's talk about, we've already discussed eye contact. I think I don't need to really spend a lot of time here, do I? I think we all know the importance of maintaining eye contact with your hearers, because then you can kind of, not only is it for them so they feel like you're engaged, but also it helps you to see what's going on, right? And like William said earlier, if you're using eye contact, you can see if people are getting tired or distracted. So it's helpful both ways. So I don't think we need to comment much on that. The use of your body. I think this is something to consider. Do you walk around? Do you sway in the pulpit? Do you lean against the pulpit? Where do you look? Where do you turn your body? Okay, these are things to keep in mind. Is you can be very distracting with your, guys that kind of maybe do this a lot, or they kind of sway around. Stevie Wonder, right? Kind of do the Stevie Wonder in the pulpit. Or some guys who walk around, and that's okay, but just be careful with that, because that could be a distraction. Or I know guys that they'll often lean against the pulpit, and that's they do that the whole sermon instead of vary, like fold their hands or use their hands, or, you know, just things to keep in mind. Okay. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time there. This is something that, again, the bottom line is use your voice, hands, gestures, facial expressions, eyes. Use all of these things to help you be most effective in communicating. Or said another way, use them in such a way that you won't be a hindrance. Okay? Or distraction. All right, this is the goal, is we want to use all of these ways that we communicate so that we can be most effective and not be a hindrance. Okay? That's what it is. That's all it is. I've seen some guys actually that look at their notes quite often, but they're not a hindrance because of the way, sort of the way they do it. I've seen other guys that have these weird habits. You know, when I told you about the guy that just looked side to side, didn't I? While he was preaching, he'd look over here, then he'd look at his notes, then he'd look over there, and there was nobody on the sides. And, you know, it just became a distraction. You know, we start laughing about it because it's like, it was just weird. I would have rather that he just looked at his notes the whole time. You know, so just things like that. We want to be careful that we're not a distraction.
Maybe he sees something there, Pastor Tim.
Maybe. That's what made us laugh was after a while, people around us started looking like, what? So he's got people in the congregation looking to the sides, and he's not looking at us. So he didn't realize that lots of the people were kind of, what does he see? What's out there? You know, and anyway, it's unfortunate because what he had to say was really good, but his manner, just where he was looking became a hindrance and got in the way of the message a little bit. Or
I think
yeah.
it is because there's a verse in the Bible that says walls have ears.
The walls have ears? Maybe. He thought the walls were listening, huh? Maybe they have ears, but I think he thought they had eyes too, right? He was.
Pastor Tim, we have in our former church, a senior pastor used to walk around and within the vicinity of the pulpit, just end to end, just saying that whenever he walks, he's thinking.
Uh-oh.
So he walks all the time, the
Yeah.
entire message.
Now, did you find that as a distraction or did it bother you?
I mean, of course, all the eyes are following him wherever he goes. So I think it's kind of distracting some of the audiences, especially if he goes to one end and the audience on the another end. It's kind of distracting, I think.
Yeah, and I know guys who will get down from the pulpit and they'll walk around in the congregation. That can actually be a distraction because, you know, people start, uh-oh, is he going to look at me? Is he going to talk to me? Is he going to ask me a question? And so people no longer are listening. They're more concerned about this other thing going on. And so we just don't want to do stuff like that. We don't want to do anything that's going to hinder the message from being heard. Like the guy jingling keys in his pocket. That was a hindrance. Or another guy, whenever he would raise his voice, it got squeaky, like high pitch. He sounded like a girl. And so, where do you get a high voice? You know, and he tried to be, it was funny. And it wasn't serious. So, you know, that's what I'm saying. You got to preach the way you're most effective. And some of you can preach at a high volume and it's impactful, and others of you, it doesn't work. Or, you know, some of you can preach very quickly and it's effective, and others who preach quickly, it's hard to understand them. You know, Steve Lawson preaches pretty quickly, but I think for him it's effective. I don't know how, if it is for you guys, if he preaches too fast or not, but yeah.
There's a question. Um, on the note of emphasis with the voice, is it, will it be helpful to put a note on your manuscript? Or when are you gonna raise your voice or put emphasis? Because sometimes you get over it because, you know, for some of the moments something enters to your mind, and then you forget that in this point you have to put an emphasis and raise your voice and so on and so forth. Will it be helpful? Does it necessary?
That's a good question. I would answer it this way. It can be helpful. It depends. You don't want something to appear to be an act, right? So if, for some people, if they write in, you know, raised voice here, it might not seem natural. It might not flow right. But for others, I use like stars on my manuscript. I don't know if I've got any here. Let's see. Doesn't have one. Or exclamation points. Or sometimes yeah, so here's an example. Sometimes I want to make sure that I recognize the importance of a particular section. And so I'll write, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'll write on the side, I'll put like an E or emphasis. You see that? And then sometimes I'll even remind myself to pause. Okay? So those are just notes for me at times where I know that my tendency is not to pause. And pausing can be very effective, especially if you're speaking, and then you stop. And sometimes even a 3 or 4 second pause, people are like, what's he going to say? What? So sometimes I'll write that in to remind myself at certain points. So I think it can be helpful to put little notes to yourself. Just, you want to make sure though, it's not like an acting job, right? Where, you know, raised voice here, lower voice here, smile here, you know, it's something just to, but if there's something that you tend to do or not do, let's say you're the guy that looks side to side. I would write notes in my manuscript to remind me, look at congregation, until I gained, until I improved in that. You know, so if you know of an area that you're weak in or that's a distraction, I think it's helpful to write little notes on your pulpit notes just to remind you about that. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? So I would say, yeah, you can put notes in your manuscript as long as they don't become a hindrance themselves and in what you're doing. So again, this and all this that we're talking about, this is just what I want to emphasize. Don't be a hindrance by however you use your hands, by your voice, by your body language, by your eye contact or lack of it. Just don't do anything that will hinder the message. Okay. And that's just going to take practice. It's going to take feedback. You're going to need to look at yourself and how you preach. You're going to need to have others help you. And no matter how long you've preached, I guarantee there are probably things that you still do that can be a distraction. And so just, ask your wife, honey, is there anything I do that's distracting? My wife's been very helpful over the years. I've done different things. Like, she told me about the scratching my mustache. And now what I'm working on is I tend to move a lot. I tend to sway. And so I have to try to remind myself to, stand still at times. Because if I keep swaying, it becomes a distraction for some people. Okay, so figure out ways that you can just, that you may be hindering your message by what you're doing. Okay. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, let me just take a moment before we talk about future steps. I want to remind you of a few things about preaching poetry. Okay, preaching poetry. We spent a lot of time studying poetry, and there's different features in poems that are important. So I just want to take a couple of minutes and let you know about a few things to consider when you're preaching a poem. All right, that's unique to preaching a poem. And again, first is preach the poem in its context. Again, remember, a poem, especially like a psalm, is similar to an epistle in that it's written at a particular occasion for a particular purpose to a particular audience by a particular author at a particular time. All right, and so we need to try as best we can to understand what's the background context of this psalm. Okay, so what is it that, and perhaps it's in the introduction, perhaps it's in a repeated phrase. But remember that the poem is has a particular singular focus and theme. All right, each poem has a specific focus and theme in response to a particular situation. All right, so make sure you capture that, like we did with Psalm 99. The focus there and the theme is to exalt and worship God because he is holy. And we talked about the occasion for this was a time likely when they were bringing the ark into the temple or soon after that. And so this focus was on God's presence in Israel. And so just really recognizing, what prompted this poem and what is the specific focus of this poem? What's its singular message? All right. So just remember that, or it's like a parable in that way, right? A parable is a story in response to a specific situation, right? Well, a poem is like that too. A poem is, I'm not saying a poem is a parable, but what I am saying is it's something that is given in response to a particular situation. And it's expressed in the form of a poem. So just make sure you preach the poem in its own context. All right? Don't just take a verse out of a poem and make it say what you want, and this is true for any passage, but particularly in poetry, remember, we need to preach each poem within its own context, okay? So just don't forget that. A second thing that we need to remember is to follow the structure of the poems. Yes, poems have imagery and poems have emotion, but that does not mean they lack structure. Most poems are instructive. They have a doctrinal and that message is often given in the form of stanzas, right? We saw that with Psalm 99. There's 3 stanzas. There's a structure. Each of those stanzas represent a particular type of holiness, right? God's majestic holiness in the first 3 verses, God's what was it? God's moral holiness in verses 4 and 5, and then God's merciful holiness in verses 6 through 9. And so there's a focus in each of those stanzas. Just like in an epistle, there's a focus in each paragraph. So remember, those poems have structure. Most poems. There are a few that don't have stanzas. They're just one overall thought. But most poems have a structure, and so make sure that you communicate that structure. Just like an epistle, you'll have an epistle will have a main point and then the outline points, right? Well, in a poem, it's the same thing, a main point and then the stanza points, which is the outline of the poem. Okay? So you'll preach poems are similar to epistles in this way, that a poem has a propositional truth. It has a doctrinal truth, a singular truth that it's communicating, just like a paragraph in an epistle. So you'll identify that truth, and that'll be the central part of your sermon, and then you'll have an outline based on the stanzas of the poem. That's similar to an epistle. All right? However, don't preach the poem like an epistle. You know what I mean by that? What do you think, Jason, you're nodding your head. What do you think I mean by that?
Before I take Pastor Tim, honestly, I used to preach sound like epistles.
And how did you preach them that was like an epistle?
The way I interpret epistles, the way I subdivide epistles, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Convey the emotion of the poem.
Yeah. Yeah, remember, there is imagery, right? There is emotion. So here's what I would suggest you remember. First, identify the imagery of the poem, all right? Take direction from the poet himself. He writes in pictures, right? He describes a picture within the poem. So paint the picture as well. Paint a picture for your hearers. Match
maybe
emotion.
maybe
Go ahead.
Pastor Tim, what I did, because I preached from, I think, 4 to 5 psalms during the first few weeks of the quarantine.
Uh-huh.
I preached on psalms. What I realized is that from our study, we learned that the way to do psalms is still through block diagramming. But when it comes to preaching psalms, you project yourself as if you are the psalmist. You bring yourself into the emotion of the poem itself. So there are times that I spoke as if I am David, something like that. That's something that you will not do when you preach an epistle, because it's just a plain statement, something like that.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, I would agree with that. So I think that kind of lends to the second point, is preach with the emotion of the psalmist. So enter his world, identify with his experience, match his emotion, and how you communicate the point. So if he's describing a peaceful scene, then use that tone. If he's describing a frightening situation, then match that emotion. If he's in despair, don't make jokes, don't laugh. The sermon's going to be more sober, right? It's going to be more serious. So identify with his experience. So yeah, think about what would it be like if you're David, and let's say you're preaching a psalm where he's on the run from his enemies. What would that be like? What would it be like to know that you've been anointed as the next king, and yet the current king is trying to kill you? What would that be like? What would it be like? I forget which psalm. Was it 53 or where his son, you know, Absalom had betrayed him, and he writes this poem speaking about that betrayal. What would that be like? I think the closer you identify, you know, with the poet, the better you will convey how, and this is important, how he wanted the message to come across. All right. So follow his lead, basically. Follow the poet's lead. All right. Let me read a quote to you, or actually, let me ask Edwin, could you read this for us?
Yes. Poems cannot be read in the same way that an epistle or a narrative or a section of a law can be read. It is intended to appeal to the emotions, to evoke feelings rather than propositional thinking, and to stimulate a response on the part of the individual that goes beyond a mere cognitive understanding of certain facts.
Okay, so what's he saying here? All right, he's saying that truth can be given in different ways in Scripture. It can be stated plainly. All right, that would be what we would call an epistle. It can be stated, it can be told in the form of a story.
Narrative.
Of a story,
Narrative.
yeah, like a parable. Or it can be communicated through emotions.
Images.
Right? And that would be, yeah, images, figurative language, right? All the poetic devices that communicate emotion. All right, emotion's not a bad thing. It can be if it's used to control, but you can communicate truths even through the use of this imagery that to affect a different part of a person's soul. If you paint a picture with your words, that can have a different effect. And so we just have to remember that's what they're trying to get at here. It's intended, they say, to appeal to the emotions, to evoke feelings, rather than merely just an idea. Okay? It's like music, you know, similar to music. You know, when you add instruments to a particular statement and make the statement in the form of a poem, you can convey a simple truth, but it has a different effect on the heart, right? Or it can. So keep that in mind. And finally, this: don't preach the poem exegetically. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, you know, for example, we talked about parallelism and figurative language, and you don't have to explain the parallelism to your hearers or the figurative language used, right? You don't have to say, so here we have a hypocatastasis. Let me explain to you, what is hypocatastasis? You know, don't do that. But knowing these things yourself is what is important. And why is it important? Because it will tell you what the author is wanting to emphasize. All right? The author is, or focus on. All right? So as long as you can see how he's using poetic devices, what kind of parallelism is he using, what kind of figurative language, as long as you can see that, that will be a guide for you in how to preach the poem that he's written and in the way that he wrote it. Okay? So just like in epistles, you know, we don't want to give all the exegetical data of our word study, or here we see that the author is using a participle, a present participle, active voice, you know, that's not going to be helpful. All right, but as you explain the text, the fact that you know it's a participle active voice, that tells you what the author is saying, and then you just need to communicate that to your hearers. And it's the same with poetry. All right, there's a lot of poetic devices and you know, like we you know, the figurative language, figures of speech, again, parallelism. Those are things that you need to study and understand to better grasp the poem. But those aren't things that you have to put into your message and explain. Otherwise, it becomes a lecture as opposed to the preaching of a poem with the emotion and the artistry that the original poet gave. So just to summarize, when preaching poetic passages, again, preach the poem in its context, follow the structure of the poem, don't preach it like an epistle, which means you're going to want to speak about the imagery and the pictures, preach with the emotion of the psalmist, and don't make it an exegetical message. All right? All right, well, there you go. Any comments, thoughts, or questions on preaching a poem before we talk about next steps? Anybody have any final thoughts or questions?
So you will preach
Pastor,
Psalm 99 next week, Pastor Tim.
I'll preach Psalm 99 next week. Actually, I will. I can put the. I'll put the link for you guys. All right, for that for next week.
Yes. Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Okay, and then you can watch it and go, but Pastor Tim, you said not to do that, and you're doing it in your sermon, so you can pick on me if you want. But I'll try to find a video link to that sermon when I preached it. William, did you have a question or comment?
More of a thought or perhaps an idea for advice or redirection. With regard to what Fee and Douglas said, or their comment, the reason why the emotion, or rather, let me state it this way, because the emotion not only triggers a memory and or experience, but likewise an understanding, or the understanding of a subject or of something, or vice versa. So it's not just what you know, but what also you may have experienced or felt, which
Yes.
makes it more engaging or receptible whenever you read figurative language, or especially in poems.
Yes.
Is that logical?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good, it's that word experience is an important word, because our experiences affect us emotionally, right? I mean,
yes.
I don't know if any of you men have lost a child. I mean, that, right? That's one of the most painful
Yes.
experiences you can imagine. Or if some of you have experienced, being delivered from almost dying, or, that has a huge effect on you emotionally. And so God's truth has the same effect. If we really were to, like in Psalm 99, it talks about the majestic holiness of God. And, if we really were to experience that, I mean, that would affect us emotionally, not just our understanding, but also how we respond to that understanding. And so I think poetry is able to draw out that experience in a way that helps us better understand the truth being conveyed. Like a parable, Jesus used those stories to communicate a truth in a way that would be more impactful to the hearers. So poetry
Because
does
you
the
can
same thing.
gain, because you can gain knowledge through, or you can gain cognitive understanding through exegesis, what we are going through, what we should practice. But at the
Yes.
same time, the emotions or the picture which target your emotion also like triggers memory of an experience. Is that right, Pastor?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, I know it's past noon. If you could just give me a few minutes of your time right now to discuss the next steps, and then I want to make sure that that's clear, and if you have any questions. So let me, next steps to complete module 3. And that, again, this is the module on poetry. All right. Hopefully you had a chance to read the document that I sent you by email, and also I posted it on our group page. But basically what I'd like to do is, for the next few months, basically, is go a week at a time and have you complete each of the 6 assignments for each of your 2 passages, right? Everyone, all of you have a Psalm passage, all of you have a Proverbs passage that's been assigned to you to preach and to do all the assignments related to that passage. And so what I want to do is continue to host the Zoom meeting at this time each Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, but we'll do things a little differently. What I want to do is basically you'll have an assignment that's due that week. And what I want to do is have I'll have the Zoom meeting, and I'll just cover the highlights of what's due for that assignment. I'll give you a Psalm 99, an example, and show you, in that example, the format that you need to follow. Now, some of you have done your assignments, so you'll be okay, but some of you have not completed them. And so the idea is, what I want to do is help you get each of those assignments done. And I want to give you some time. We've had a while, but I know it's been busy. I know with COVID, things have been, difficult. But what I'd like to do is each week I'll have one of the 6 assignments for that passage due. We'll talk about that assignment during the Zoom meeting. And then if you have any specific questions about your passage, we'll use that time. You can just ask me, and I'll help you with your specific passage. So it won't be like a lecture per se, like we've been doing. I won't have fixed notes and everything. But what I want to do is just go through one assignment each week that's due, and then give you a chance if you have questions. And then your assignment for that week will be due a few days later. So for example, let me show you this first. So I've set these dates in the future. I wasn't sure if we would finish the workshop this week or next week. So next week we won't be meeting. All right. What I'll do is post my sermon and my manuscript from Psalm 99. If you want to take a look at that, see how I did it. I'll post that for next week, so we won't meet. But then the following week, and I might change these dates and move them up a week. I think I'm going to need to do that. Is I'll do the so instead of, I'm 1 week off here. Okay. So I'll change these dates and send it back out. But so essentially 2 weeks from now, we're going to be working on the setting and structure analysis for your Psalm passage. All right. So if you haven't finished that assignment, what I want you to do is before the October 1st is try to do your assignment, and then you can join the Zoom meeting. And if you have any questions about your assignment, you can ask them. I'll talk about the key parts of the assignment, and then the assignment will be due about 4 days after that. Okay, and I'll catch up on grading. I'll grade the assignments and make sure that's being done as well. Okay, and then the next week, the focus will be on the parallelism analysis for your Psalm passage. All right, so we'll discuss that assignment during our Zoom meeting if you have any specific questions about your passage. And then the assignment will be due on Canvas about 4 days after that. And we'll just do that. We'll go through every assignment for your Psalm passage. All right? Does that make sense so far? All right, so.
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Okay, so I've set it up this way because I really want to help you guys get finished, but you have to be committed now for these next few months to keep on the this schedule. All right, so you really have to give some time these next several weeks if you haven't finished the assignments, but you'll need to keep this pace, and you're welcome to work ahead. You know, if you can finish all the assignments in 2 weeks and turn them in, that's totally fine. I'm not saying you have to wait, but I do want to give you a chance, if you have some questions on your assignment, to ask me, and we'll do it during this time. So we'll go through, and basically within about 6 weeks, you'll turn in all your assignments, all 6 assignments for your Psalm passage. And then this is the thing I like to do, is rather than waiting until the next module, module 4, to preach your sermon, I want to try to do our preaching labs after we've completed the assignments for that passage. So for example, when you finish the 6 assignments for your Psalms passage, then I'll give you a couple of weeks to record your message and then to provide a link so that you can be evaluated. All right. Now, depending on COVID and what's going on in 6 weeks or so, I'm going to talk to TJ and AJ. If you guys are able to gather, at least some of you guys in Cebu, if you're able to gather together and preach your message in a group, I think that would be the best. And then you could do evaluation, and then just record that message so that I can watch it as well. I think that's going to be the best way to do this, because we've tried doing these labs on Zoom, and if internet's not working or there's, you know, interrupted video, it really isn't helpful. So I think the best way is just, you need to record your sermon. That's the best I think we can do right now, is record it and then provide a link, and then I'll evaluate you, or Pastor DeVraj or TJ or AJ. We'll give you feedback. But I think that the best thing to do would be do the assignments, then preach the passage. I'll give you a couple of weeks to finish your sermon manuscript, then preach the passage, record it, and you can record it on your iPhone or, you know, however you want to do it, and then turn that in, and then we will go to, after that's done, you know, sometimes toward the end of November, then we'll go to your Proverbs passage, and we'll do the same thing. You'll do 1 week for each assignment. We'll meet together so that I can answer your questions, or you know, go over the assignment with you, and then at the end of that Proverbs passage, either you'll preach the sermon, record it again, or if by that time, if February it's open and I can travel there, then we'll just preach those sermons during module 4. Okay, so the goal and the hope is maybe to begin module 4 in early February, but we'll see. Yeah.
Pastor Tim, how about preaching our passages in the congregation? And
yeah,
then
even better. That'd be great.
We cannot preach it for 30 minutes only, probably 45.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
That's a nice technicality, Pastor Jess.
Yeah. But you all heard him, right? He said 45 minutes. He didn't say an hour and a half. But that's actually a good point. I'll just type it in. You can preach, you can record your sermon from a Sunday service or a weeknight service, whatever. And if you do that, you are allowed to go over 30 minutes. Okay? But don't go over an hour, please. All right? So that's only if you're preaching it to a congregation. If you're going to record it, just preaching, for me to evaluate, then we'll stick to 30 minutes, like the preaching lab. But if you do it before a congregation or a Bible study, I'll let you go longer since it's being recorded. Okay. So I think, that'd be fine. And like I said, let's see, in a month or so, what the quarantine looks like. If you're able to gather together, I would encourage you to maybe meet together, preach the sermons to each other, and so you can talk about it, together as well. All right, so we'll talk more about that in a few weeks. Yeah, Jesse said 1 hour and 45. No, I heard 45 minutes, Jesse. Okay, and so again, this is the idea, and I'll adjust these dates a little bit since we ended this week. So next week we won't meet. You can begin working on, see where you're at with your assignments and begin working on them. And then the following week we'll spend about 6 weeks getting all your assignments done for your Psalm passage, and then record yourself preaching that sermon for that passage. And we'll talk about that in the weeks to come as things progress, okay? And then after you've preached that sermon, we'll start up after that going through the Proverbs passage. And notice here, when we get around Christmas, we'll take a few weeks off, okay? Because I know that's a busy time. So I'll give you some time there. But I want to try to stick to this schedule as best we can, because I'd like to, again, Lord willing, be able to do the module 4 in February. But let's see how things go. Okay? And if I'm still not able to travel, we'll come up with a way to do module 4. Whether it's online or we'll figure something out. But let's just go a step at a time here. All right? So when I say the assignment is due, I mean by that you turn it in on Canvas by that date. Okay? And please don't get behind. This is I think the chance for all of us to really work, catch up, and be able to finish module 3 and then prepare us for module 4. Okay, any questions? Does this make sense? Do you have any suggestions that could make this better?
John has a question in the chat.
Oh. Can we pass our assignments before the due date, including the preaching? Yes, certainly. Some of you have already done, I think a few of you have done all the assignments already, except for the preaching. So, yeah, you're more than welcome to turn things in early. If you want to, when we talk about the specific assignment, you're more than welcome to redo the assignment if you want to as well. All right. Before, so for example, let's say you did the parallelism assignment for your Psalm passage, and then you join the Zoom meeting that week and you realize that maybe there's some things you would do differently now that we've studied parallelism again and you've reviewed it, you're welcome to redo the assignment to improve your understanding of the passage. All right, but it has to be turned in, whether it's the first time you're doing it or you're revising it, has to be turned in by the due date that I give you. Okay. And then yes, you can finish, you can do all, more than one assignment before the due date. All right. These due dates are just like the final day that's allowed for you to complete that particular assignment. So it's due that date, or you can turn it in anytime before that. All right.
Pastor Tim,
Yes. Yeah, Eric.
if we can gather November 30 with AJ or TJ, much better for our Psalm passage.
Yes. Yeah, I think it'd be much better to preach face to face.
If they will allow us November 30 with AJ or TJ.
Yeah, or any time between these two dates, the 6th, any time between the 16th and the 30th. All right, those 2 weeks or so. If you can find a time to get together. So what I'm going to do is next month, let's see where, by the end of October, let's see what, if you're still in, modified GCQ, or, let's see where the quarantine is at. And then we will talk about the preaching labs. But my preference is that you're able to gather. So that's the better way. I may not be able to be there, but at least if you record it, then I can give you a grade for it. But you guys can discuss together if you gather with each other. I think that's a better thing to do if you can.
Yes.
Let's see where the virus issues are at in another month. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Eric?
yes. Yes, Pastor Tim. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I will, I'll update the document that I sent you, modify the dates. I will be traveling a little bit here in the States, so I'll have to adjust a few of those dates as well, because I may not be able to meet during a couple of the weeks due to travel here. So, but I'll put that together for you. And then, like I said, next week we'll take the week off. I'll post my Psalm 99 sermon if you need something to entertain you, help you fall asleep. I don't know, but you can see how I did this psalm, and then we'll get working on getting those assignments done. Okay.
Okay.
Now, by the way, if you've done some of the assignments so that you're ahead, don't just say, okay, I have some time, I can wait till my assignment's due. And no, go ahead and start working on them now, even if it's not due for a while, because things can happen and you don't want to be waiting till the last minute, right? Right?
Right.
What is it?
Sakto.
Sakto.
Right. Right.
Right.
So
All right. So just go ahead and get started now, wherever you're at in the process. Even if you're done with the Psalm passage, you can start working on the Proverbs ones as well. Okay, so I think this will allow us to, for you guys to get caught up, those of you who are behind, and even to get ready for that sermon. And yeah, if you want to preach your sermon earlier, if you've done everything, go ahead and preach it, record it. And what I'll do maybe is set up on Canvas, I'll set up an assignment where you can give me a link to your sermon, or we'll have to figure that out. If you don't know how to get me your sermon, we'll have to figure that out. So we'll talk about that later though. Okay. I'm sure you're hungry.
Sure.
All right. Pastor Boy, what's that?
Have mercy on us.
Okay, I will. Pastor Boy, would you mind praying, closing our time together in prayer? Is Pastor Boy there? Oh,
Boy P.
Boy P.
yeah.
Okay, let us pray.
Thank you.